8 to 10 a.m. and you're listening to...
Well, it's amazing. This show has been going on all throughout the month of Ramadan, which actually means it's my last show because that's what I normally do, give off my time to Salam Media just during this month of Ramadan. Well, I'll tell you what, on this last show, some really important issues we want to talk about, particularly South Africa's relations, and the key word is relations with other countries around the world, and inevitably many of those countries are hotspots, and just South Africa's official stance on that. So I think there's nobody more important to get hold of than the Minister Naledi Pandor. Of course, she is the Minister of International Relations for South Africa. So Minister Pandor, appreciate your time. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Good seeing you.
Wa alaikum salam, and good morning to all who are joining Salam Media. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And up front, may I say this, greetings to you, your family. Of course, we have connected with your husband, Sharif, as well as your daughter, Aisha, on many, many occasions. So pass on my greetings and salam to them too.
Thank you very much. We'll do so. And could I express Eid Mubarak to all those who are celebrating today? We are all waiting to hear from our ulama as to what our Eid day will be. And I hope everyone has had a Mubarak Ramadan. I know
Absolutely.
some cry as Ramadan departs, but we look forward to Eid, inshallah.
Absolutely. In fact, there's been some pictures being sent around joyous celebrations around Jerusalem last night. And they're just fascinating, and hopefully we'll share that on our platforms later on. That'll be really fascinating. Let's then talk about, that's a good segue to talk about many issues. I thought, in the 20 odd minutes or so that we have, or 25 minutes, let's get your thoughts in terms of your position as a department, in terms of your relationship with not just the obvious one, which is, Russia and Ukraine. That's one thing, but there's a range of them. So firstly, upfront, what's South Africa's general position in terms of where it positions itself in relation to the rest of the world when it comes to dealing with issues of conflict and alignment or non-alignment?
Well, with respect to conflict, I think South Africa has always had a very clear position that it will endeavor in every case to play a role in seeking peace, in helping conflicting parties to come together. This is the foundation of our own constitutional democracy, that where there is conflict, where there's disagreement, we would urge that there shouldn't be a resort to arms, but that parties that are in conflict must come together around a negotiating table and, where needed, seek the help and participation of others so that they might find a resolution. So with respect to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, we have urged diplomacy throughout this period of conflict, and have indeed said as South Africa, we will always have a non-aligned stance, because we know that the involved parties go beyond a bilateral conflict. It's a much wider issue, and we don't wish to be returned to the situation of the Cold War, where there was almost a compulsion that developing countries in particular should take a particular a specific position with respect to one antagonist or the other. So we adopted non-alignment as our approach and support always for a search for peaceful settlement.
Now let's just, stay with that one, with Russia in the non-alignment, right? The criticism has been, and you've been quoted to say Russia has always been our friends, right? That almost suggests, as opposed to non-alignment, that almost suggests a sense of partisanship, to say, because we're friends, because we're chommies, we're going to look at Russia very differently compared to, say, our position with Israel, for example.
Well, remember that we've been very clear. I have not at any instance said I support Russia's entry into another country's territory. I have insisted that all of us as member states of the UN must respect the sovereign territory of all member states of the United Nations. Not one leader in government has ever said we support Russia and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We've said we abhor war and conflict, and we do, but we are not prepared to take one side or the other. We believe the issues are far more complex than a choice of one country or the other. So while we really are shocked and dismayed at the level of destruction that we see in Ukraine, including the deaths, we continue, because of this, to urge both parties and those who are close to them to work toward a diplomatic solution. You would note that the United Nations has been totally marginalized in this whole process when it was established essentially to help conflicting parties to come to resolution peacefully. So I think what South Africa is saying is, let us work both with Russia as well as with Ukraine. Of course, we have a long-standing historical relationship, not just with Russia, but it was with the Soviet Union, which included Ukraine. And it is for this reason that we can't be anti-Ukraine, nor can we be anti-Russia. However, with the matter of Israel, Israel is an occupier of the land of another people. And on that basis, we're very clear that we stand with the people of Palestine.
So in this case, do you not see the Russians as occupiers of the Ukraine?
The problem is there's a conflict underway. There are issues of security concerns of Russia, which cannot be ignored nor left unaddressed, because this will then be a never-ending conflict. So I'm saying that to say it's a choice between the two wishes to compel us, and it tends to be countries in Africa and in the developing world that are being asked to make a choice as though there aren't other matters that would require a resolution. So the role of NATO in this conflict cannot be neglected. The security concerns of the Russian Federation cannot be neglected. The security concerns of Ukraine cannot be neglected. The territorial integrity of Ukraine cannot be neglected. So the issue is, it's not an either or, it's actually sitting down and looking at the range of matters that make up the problematique that has led to where we are now. And merely saying choose one or the other doesn't address the complexity.
Okay, you've said upfront that you certainly, and you've never publicly said that you support the Russian invasion, but you've also used the word we abhor, the atrocities and the losses of life. Do you? So you don't support it, but do you oppose it?
Well, we certainly feel that we shouldn't have got to this point. We believe if more had been done with respect to various agreements that had been entered into post-2014 and many years before that, we wouldn't be where we are now. So we do say that the Western world has a great deal of responsibility in terms of needing to more cogently address the concerns of Russia. So I think what I do sense is we don't like complexity. So we tend to reduce matters to very simple equations, and we don't read the history of particular problems, challenges, and conflicts that confront us on the globe. This particular issue is one that is, I think, very challenging. And I do feel regret that such harm has come to the people of Ukraine. And I am sincere in my belief that we need to promote diplomacy. We need to see the Secretary General of the United Nations playing and being allowed to play a stronger role in leading a peace process. I have called previously for an eminent persons group to be established, as we had in the days when we still had apartheid in South Africa. And it was this eminent persons group that began the process of persuasion, of drawing the parties together. So this world that said to South Africans, come together, speak to your enemy, and actually resolve the issues around a negotiating table. Suddenly this world is against diplomacy. This is quite astounding to us.
Okay, point taken. So the plan really is to be friends with both the Ukraine and the Russians and trying to get them around a table. But has it worked? It hasn't so far, has it?
No, nobody's is making the effort. Turkey has been, I think, quite amazing. President Erdogan in talking to both parties, but I don't think there's been world support. As you know, the only engagement we had was when they began to talk about the grain exports and allowing a route through the oceans for grain to reach developing countries. We know that not all the grain has reached developing countries. It would seem quite a lot of it reached Europe and elsewhere. So, you know, there are many issues of concern that are associated with the current situation. I believe that China has perhaps done something akin to what we have been referring to. And I know among leaders within the African Union, there is a process of trying to open up engagement and talk to both parties.
Okay, well, I want to pick up on other issues as well, but two things related to Russia, Ukraine before we move on. There's, of course, the BRICS summit that comes up in August in South Africa. You know, whether you're friends or you're not, at this point in time, there's a wanted sign for the Russian president, and the plan is that as a BRICS leader, he would be in South Africa. When I last heard you, there were talks of embarking on a type of conversation or dialogue with the USA to explain South Africa's position if and when Putin arrives in South Africa, because as part of the ICC and a signatory, you would be compelled to arrest him. What's the position there now?
Well, firstly, Ashraf, if you would allow me, I want to clear up this thing of the envoys to the United States. It was certainly not me who referred to the envoys visiting the US with respect to the ICC warrant. This is not the intention at all. There are two things that are of concern with respect to the United States. Firstly, following the first resolution that was voted upon on Ukraine in the United Nations General Assembly, the United States House of Representatives crafted a piece of legislation which is titled Malign Activities of Russia Act, Malign Activities of Russia in Africa Act. This legislation seeks to impose proposed punishment on African countries that allow what are called malign activities of Russia on their soil. We are opposed to such legislation and are appalled that the United States drafted such legislation in the House of Representatives. And we understand it's a bipartisan proposed bill. We did approach the US concerning the bill, both as South Africa, but also SADC, as well as the African Union. And to our surprise, they then amended the title of the bill to say malign Russian activities in the globe or in the world bill. So they continue with this proposed legislation. So that's the first, that we wish our envoys to engage leaders in the United States on. The second matter is following the third resolution on which we abstained in the United Nations, in the General Assembly. We've abstained on all the resolutions because none of them referred to peace and to a search for peace through diplomacy. So we have not supported them. We abstained on each of the three. After the third one, again, House of Representatives leaders proposed a resolution against South Africa, which proposes that President Biden must investigate a reduction of the current relationship between South Africa and the United States of America. It is on those two matters that the envoys that will be deployed by President Ramaphosa intend to engage stakeholders on in the United States of America. We are not going to engage them on the ICC. They are not members. They are not state parties to the treaty. They've always been very negative about the ICC. So their sudden admiration for it arises because the ICC has directed its attention to President Putin. But when it is directed toward the government of Israel and their leaders, there's not a comment.
They turned a
So
blind
we
eye. I think
wouldn't
point
approach them.
taken. Okay, so in terms of your South Africa's envoys, right? Are you concerned that right or wrong that there's been criticism of South Africa's position, and you know that, right, with regard to Russia, and I'm referring again to the impending BRICS summit coming up, that are you concerned about possible an economic drop-off from the USA, because ultimately you also want to keep the South African economy ticking? Are you concerned enough that they will carry through on that threat?
Well, I believe that engaging with envoys is a route towards seeking a diplomatic approach. We would want to persuade them that it would not be wise for them to impose any form of sanction against South Africa. All of us are sovereign nations, and we have a right to hold particular positions, just as they held support for apartheid for many, many years in their country. And following our achievement of freedom in South Africa, we established positive relations with them. We didn't hold their stance against our struggle as a means of having no relations with them. I also would want to add, as I often do, that the economic relations are with business persons, not government individuals. And I think our products in South Africa are of such quality that they would continue to be wanted by American consumers and American business persons. And of course, if there is action that would seek to harm our economy, we would have to look at how we respond with respect to that. But our initial approach, our initial approach is toward persuasion.
Okay. Putin and the visits in August. What's the position of South Africa and international relations?
Well, essentially, as I've said previously, government is discussing this matter. And once we fully canvassed the views within government, probably myself or President Ramaphosa would indicate the way forward. But I must indicate, as I have previously stated, that right at the beginning of the year when we became chair, we issued invitations to all heads of state who are BRICS members, and none of those invitations have been withdrawn at this moment.
So as it stands, the invitation is there to the head of state of Russia, in this case here, Putin, to arrive. I mean, you must concede it is one hell of a hot potato, isn't it?
Definitely very, very hot, probably my hottest in this office. And it's something that I think we need to give a very, very serious consideration to, because we are states parties to the treaty. But it's also important, as I've said earlier, that our sovereignty is respected. I have argued that the kind of world we wish to see is an even-handed world where all are treated the same way. I also note a complication. You would recall that the charge or the issuing of the warrant relates to allegations concerning removal of children from the Ukrainian territory into the Russian territory, and almost that it's a form of trafficking of children in the context of the war. There have been reports in the last 2 weeks that children have been returned to their parents. So one is wondering, where does the charge actually stand? And we don't have such information from the ICC at this point.
Okay, last thing on that. I mean, would you concede? And yes, we've already made the point that it is a hot potato. Would it be easier to say, please attend virtually, President Putin? It's just that much simpler.
I don't always like the easy option, and I do think, Ashraf, that there's a need to begin to shake up the world. You know, we need to be careful about always being so ready to be subsumed under the leadership of the dominant countries in the world, who, while expressing values that they regard as positive human values, do not practice them all over the world. So I think sometimes there's a need to set a lesson in place. And maybe South Africa is a country with the standing to begin to say, look, let's just think of each other differently, and let's begin to recognize our equality.
I mean, I hear that, and I think that that's sort of, and I hear that, and that's sort of,
they don't want us to be courageous, but
yeah, but I think that that sort of level of courage and heroism is encouraged, absolutely, but it is also fraught with danger, right? You know that the reality of world relations are not that clear cut.
Yeah, well, it depends how we define ourselves, I think. I believe we have some of the best agricultural products of any country in the world. I always say to my colleagues, other foreign ministers, you know, who purchase citrus from South Africa, ask them, have you tasted a yellow cling peach yet? And they say, oh, yeah, I've eaten a yellow peach, but I say, from South Africa, from the Cape. And then they say, not sure. I say, the day you taste it, you'll know where to buy peaches. So I think there are products that come from South Africa, and I don't mention, for example, platinum and other mineral resources. So South Africans mustn't undermine themselves as being of irrelevance to the world. We mustn't over-assume, but we mustn't underplay.
Okay, got that. Just, I mean, I'm always reminded by, I think it was Professor Chris Landsman's comments to me on when I was at SAFM, and he made the point. He says the problem with the USA is it's a democracy at home and a dictatorship abroad, and that plays through in its policies. Have you alluded to that in what you've just said earlier about the USA?
I wouldn't put it that strongly, but I think they do have this air of wanting to remain and be the key power in the world, and we're seeing it being forcefully executed now. And I think it's most unfortunate, because I do think the United States of America can play an extremely important role in global affairs, in helping to entrench positive values. But this sense of a Leviathan that is able to just, you know, influence everybody, push who it wishes aside, tell you you'll use highway components or you won't use highway components, you let this country produce, you can't produce. I think this is unwarranted, and I really believe they need to think again, because they're not being seen by everyone as a force for the positive.
You referred to the United Nations early on, and I've made a note. I must come back to that. You spoke about the UN has been marginalized, and then you spoke about the Secretary General, and you said, you know, he should be allowed to do his work. Tell us more about that.
Well, the Secretary General of the United Nations is the leader of the most significant global institution in the world. But today, with respect to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, we don't hear mention of the Secretary General. We don't see him. He should be involved in very active international diplomacy. But it's almost as though someone is holding him back because the UN was created exactly to address this kind of problem. And I do feel, and we feel, that the Secretary General has not really been given the room to use his best resources to help to initiate a process for peace.
Who do you think is A, holding him back, and B, do I take it that you've told him that, to say, Mr. SG, like, where are you?
Well, I wouldn't say where are you. I do know that there are countries, particularly of the P5, that have a great deal of influence within the United Nations, especially on how it functions. And I leave it to you, as a very senior media professional, to do your investigations.
Well, let's see what comes out of that. But it does suggest to me, and you know, the UN is a complex organization. I certainly know when it was started, but by its very nature, with the Security Council and the powers of veto on a range of issues, and you referred to Israel earlier on as well, that the UN itself is in need of serious reform, isn't it?
Absolutely. I would agree very, very strongly. I've been intrigued and have commented, for example, on how there's been a sudden diminution of the role of the Security Council because of the availability of veto for the P5, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. They were all happily using the veto. And then now with this conflict, suddenly they say, if there's a veto on an issue related to Ukraine, the matter must be taken for a vote to the General Assembly, and it is decided by majority. They refuse to use provisions of the Charter that allowed that in the past with respect to Palestine, with respect to DRC, with respect to South Sudan, many, many issues with respect to Syria, and so on and so forth. But suddenly, when it concerns Russia, General Assembly becomes a majority voting bloc.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes or so to go. Just so what I thought, if we can, there's about 5 hotspots. They're probably all worth half an hour each. We don't have the time, but if I could just get your comment on each one of them. So let's talk about the very topical one right now, Sudan. Effectively, 2 army people fighting each other, and the casualties are the people of the country. What's South Africa's position? South Africa, the AU, what can be done?
Well, on the first day of the conflict, we issued a statement calling on the 2 parties to lay down arms. We called for a cessation of hostilities and expressed our dismay at the fact that they were now on the streets battling and threatening the lives of ordinary civilians, all because of an agreement that one of the parties does not accept. So we have called for a cessation. We are talking to the leaders of both groupings through our own leadership here in South Africa. And we have indicated that we are ready to step in to assist them. And in fact, had been doing so. I'd been very hopeful because we had the conflicting parties here in Durban in a training program led by Accord, in which we were really looking at post-conflict legislative provisions and a framework for a new constitution. And I thought that 6-week program had gone very well, and I was hopeful. So I am dismayed that things have collapsed to this point.
And with issues like that, and some of the other issues that are raised, besides official responses via letters and official communique, how much of that happens where you literally pick up a phone? I'm thinking about myself telling a chummy, telling a friend to say, "Come on, you can't do this." Give us an insight into that. Does that happen where you could pick up pick up a phone and speak to a counterpart on the other side of the world and say, "This is not right, man. Come on."
Yeah. No, indeed it does. In fact, we've spoken a lot about the United States. And I should say that I do have frequent calls with my colleague, Secretary Blinken, and we get on very well. Indeed, we do phone each other and say, look, this is just a problem. And we will do so. I will speak to my friends that I know in Sudan. I'm also heading to Ethiopia, so I'll get their sense of the issues and, really put our heads together to see what could be done.
Okay, you made the distinction about Israel as an occupier, and that's going on for a long, long time. And beyond that, there's a series of other layers which are less important. How far are we down the line in terms of reversing that occupier status and the role South Africa can play on that?
Well, I feel the situation has got far worse than it was a few years ago, and I think maybe what happened in the last decade, maybe that South Africa withdrew to some degree and didn't continue the efforts that we had begun with the spear talks and so on, and I think that should have continued. So we've been somewhat outside of the process, but have had and continue to have strong links with Palestine, and do take from time to time guidance from them as to what they would like to see us do. And I believe we should continue to have that engagement. I have been working with some of the human rights NGOs, both in Palestine and Israel, and just getting their insights, and so developing responses to the crisis, drawing on their own on-the-ground experience. I've also been talking to women foreign ministers about the need for us as women foreign ministers to be more vocal. We've agreed that we need to do more about publicly calling for definitive action in response to the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh. And we will be marking her anniversary, the murder of her anniversary. Sorry, the anniversary of her murder, rather. I'm sorry. I think it's not having water to drink.
Yeah.
And we, hope as women foreign ministers that we will make our voices more visible in regard to all women who are in the most unfortunate situation of conflicts.
And what can the UN do about that? I mean, in particular?
It must keep Palestine on the agenda, but I think more should be done. And really, the lead country would be the United States of America. I think in the last year, in the period in which President Biden has been in office, there certainly has been, we've had more positive statements about, criticizing various actions by the government. But I think America has far more of a role to play than it may be playing at this moment.
Okay, let's talk about the Sahrawi people of West Africa, right, Northwest Africa, and their issues with Morocco. Do you see Morocco as an occupier as well?
Indeed, yes. They claim that they are not. They say it's their territory. We just got quite a letter from His Excellency the Ambassador of Morocco to South Africa, following an article by our Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Deputy Minister Botus. And despite, the letter having a great deal of argument as to the correct things that Morocco has done, the people of a territory say, we wish to have greater political autonomy, to argue that we're doing this for you, we're doing that for you, we're doing this for them, and so on, and South Africa, you are wrong, wants us to neglect the voice of the people who are experiencing oppression and who do not enjoy freedom.
Let's talk about very quickly the problems of the Rohingya in Myanmar. What's your position there, and what's the progress being made?
We again have, joined nations in the United Nations with respect to the issue of Myanmar. And again, we are appalled that this has lasted as long as it has done. And it relates to comments I've made before, that this universal focus on Russia and Ukraine has detracted from attention to terrible conflicts that are underway in various parts of the world. So it's not just the Rohingya. That is a very terrible situation. But you also have terrorists murdering people in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Chad every day, in Mozambique. But none of us speak about those. They're invisible. So the situation is most worrying. We are hoping to become a dialogue partner within ASEAN, and we'll be able to have a closer sense of how ASEAN is responding to the issue of Myanmar. They do share with us that it's very difficult. I had opportunity to meet with my Indonesian counterpart, and she did indicate the steps they've been taking and how essentially the military in Myanmar ignore all directives from ASEAN.
Okay, interesting. What about the Uyghur community in China?
What we have said with respect to the Uyghur community is really we would like to call on our friends, the People's Republic of China, to ensure that all persons enjoy freedom of religion. When we speak to them, they assure us that this is the case. But the reports we're getting indicate that there is a problem. And of course, the call by South Africa is always, we must have respect for religious freedom, for the right of every person to practice their religion.
So in a case like that, where they assure you as friends and the reports indicate otherwise, I mean, do you go back to the Chinese and say, we don't believe you, the facts prove otherwise?
No, I haven't said to them, I don't believe them. I've said to them, we keep getting these reports. It's important that you do something. As even our community in South Africa has approached me and expressed concern. We do need assurance, from yourselves that people are not being treated in the way that is reported.
But should you be harder? I understand the long-standing relationship there, but should you be harder to say the evidence suggests, effectively a elimination of an entire community progressively?
I haven't seen that evidence myself personally. I've heard reports, and I'm not sure that the reports are entirely from a trusted media source. And so when you have media reports by media that is very attached to a particular government, that is very hostile to another, it's difficult to really appropriate the information as accurate.
I take it you will pursue that line. Let's look at the last one then, with your BRICS partner, which is India. Yes, a democracy, but again, increasing reports again of a huge minority community, the Muslims of India, again being targeted, and increasingly so in the last couple of years.
Indeed, and I have raised this with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of India. And again, you get these assurances. I think at times what we need to do is have stronger civil society collaboration and not, expect that the government in any country will do all that is required with respect to pursuing particular issues. I get, demands from the Tamil community in South Africa concerning their view about how Tamil people are treated in Sri Lanka. Then I meet the foreign minister of Sri Lanka, and I'm assured they're making efforts to address inclusion. So I think sometimes as civil society, there's also work that we must do.
Well, perhaps you can answer this last question then, because it's completely related. Yes, I mean, these foreign ministers may well talk down the atrocities in their countries, and that happens in many countries in the world. They're never going to own up. Is it time, therefore, to understand that diplomacy has a certain level, but beyond a certain level, you have to move beyond diplomacy? I'm talking about all these countries we've mentioned, and linked to that, when you speak about civil society, if I understand you correctly, are you saying there needs to be the upscaling of civil society activism from South Africa with other parts of the world? And if the answer to that is yes, how should they go about doing so?
Well, I don't know if it would be from South Africa, but I think if South Africans are interested in a particular issue, then they should interface with the nationals. What we need to be careful about, as I said earlier, is that we don't appropriate subjective reporting as being accurate, because we may then fall foul of particular nations. So I think it's very important that we get accurate information. And if we feel there's a need to look at mounting particular campaigns, then it's vital that we interface with organs in the countries that we're concerned about. When we began to persuade the international community to join us in the international struggle against apartheid, it was South Africans advocating for that, not others coming, to say to us, listen, we got to do it for you. So I think it's important we link in. And this is why, with respect to Palestine, we're talking to all parties, even to NGOs, to lawyers that are human rights lawyers and their organizations, because we would like to, be part of their interventions rather than, determining our own actions that might not be an adequate response to the challenges confronting them.
Well, I think there's a point well taken, because you're quite right. We can't exactly determine the future of other countries, so that makes sense. However, it does leave that question, when does diplomacy end and other forms of action begin to be accelerated? You don't have to answer that. That's the $1 million question for all of us. Appreciate your time. Thank you for giving off your time on this, being thirsty and all. Much appreciated, much acknowledged. And let me wish you well, and certainly to your family on the day of Eid that comes up. Well, hopefully by tomorrow, inshallah. Thank you, and salam.
Inshallah. Wa alaikum salam, and thank you very much to you, and best wishes to you and the family and all at Salam Media. Thank you.
Will do, indeed. There we are, Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister Naledi Pandor, Minister of International Relations. I'll tell you what, so much has come out of that conversation. Yes, there are questions. Yes, there are answers. My sense is there are further questions that will come out of that conversation, and you can comment on any of the social media platforms of Salam Media. Do also watch it on YouTube. It'll be placed there, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can send a voice note like ASAP 061 766 0355 061 766 0355. Tell you what, another form of diplomacy is required regarding two important issues: Eskom and load shedding, and the day of Eid. We'll pick up on that right after this.